Think of the Tree of Life poster from your high school biology class. You know the one?
Oh, yeah, the classic one.
Right. It starts with a single, microscopic root at the bottom and branches upward into this sprawling, chaotic canopy of fish, birds, primates, and everything else.
Right.
Now, I want you to mentally rip that poster off the wall. Because what if the history of life isn't a tree of random mutations branching out over deep time?
Which is a wild thing to consider.
It is. What if instead you are looking at a meticulously version-controlled software launch? Just like a product roadmap of a massive tech company like Apple or something.
It's a massive paradigm shift, for sure. But that is exactly the framework we are analyzing in our deep dive today. We're exploring this highly radical thought experiment presented in our sources called the Creator's Creative Portfolio Taxonomy.
Or CPT, for short.
Exactly, the CPT. And it asks us to look at the exact same biological data, the genetics, the fossil record, the taxonomic hierarchies, but strip away the assumption of unguided macro-evolution.
Right, take that completely out of the picture.
Yeah. And instead, we analyze the biosphere as a curated corporate product roadmap managed by an overarching intelligence.
And to be clear for everyone listening, this isn't about some entity just, snapping its fingers to magically conjure a finished ecosystem out of thin air.
No, not at all.
Right. The CPT framework is deeply mechanical. It models a creator who works in stages using intense iteration, delegated design teams, and coordinated release schedules.
Which really forces a complete reevaluation of Linneaen taxonomy.
Okay.
Because for over a century, the higher taxonomic ranks domain, kingdom, phylum, class have been inextricably linked to the theory of common descent.
Right, the whole branching tree idea.
Exactly. They are treated as literal historical branching points. So a mammal and a reptile are grouped under the phylum Chordata because, theoretically, they share a deep evolutionary ancestor that first developed a backbone.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we remove common descent from the equation, those macro-level buckets, they don't just disappear.
No, the nested hierarchy is still undeniably there. The data doesn't change.
Exactly. A bat still shares more biological infrastructure with a whale than it does with, a mushroom. So if those shared traits aren't artifacts of a shared ancestor, what are they?
Well, in evolutionary biology, those shared derived traits are called synapomorphies.
Synapomorphies.
But under the CPT model, a synapomorphy is reinterpreted. It's not an inherited artifact, but undeniable evidence of design similarity. It is the strategic reuse of modular components.
Right. So it's kind of like art history. Think about the transition from the Baroque period to neoclassicism.
Okay, yeah.
A new art movement doesn't evolve via blind mutation. It's an intentional shift by a designer who reuses earlier techniques, right?
Yeah.
They keep the shading or the perspective, but they prune out the unfashionable elements.
That's a great way to look at it. Or even like a shared CAD file in engineering.
Oh, sure.
If we look at a bat wing, a whale flipper, and a human hand, traditional biology struggles with how similar the underlying bone structure is. It tries to trace it all back to a single ancient lobe-finned fish. But under this engineering model, that pentadactyl limb, the 5-digit structure, is just a highly successful, stable engineering module.
So the designer figured out that a one-bone, two-bone, many-bones joint structure is just optimal for torque and leverage.
Exactly. So they licensed that exact same structural code across vastly different product lines.
Wow. And if life isn't a branching evolutionary tree, but rather a series of intentional design shifts, how does this biological company actually organize and classify its vast array of products?
Well, this brings us to how this overarching intelligence organizes that library. Because you cannot manage a portfolio of billions of complex, metabolically active products without a rigorous organizational hierarchy.
You'd need a massive filing system.
Absolutely. The sources propose that we retain the traditional Linneaen names for the sake of data compatibility, but we fundamentally change their definitions to map directly onto a corporate technology stack.
Wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
If this is an entirely new paradigm, why not just scrap the Linneaen names completely? Why keep terms like kingdom and phylum?
That's a fair question.
Yeah.
But the observable nested hierarchy is real. It just requires a different explanation. It's about data compatibility. We are mapping the reuse of genetic modules rather than hypothetical ancestors. The labels still work perfectly to describe the groupings.
Oh, I see. So it's just swapping out the historical justification for an engineering one.
Precisely. And this mapping is where the thought experiment really solidifies. At the absolute top, encompassing everything, is the design portfolio.
Which is like the overarching master vision.
Right, the persistent master vision of the overarching leader, executed across distinct geological epochs. Moving down one level, we hit the domain.
Okay.
In traditional taxonomy, you have your basic split between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. The CPT framework defines the domain as the core operating system.
Oh, that makes so much sense. So bacteria and archaea function as incredibly simple, lightweight operating systems. They have zero overhead, no nucleus, no complex containerization. They are built for raw survivability and just rapid execution of basic code.
Yes.
But eukarya, the domain that houses us, and plants and fungi, that's an entirely different software architecture.
It is the shift to object-oriented programming. Eukarya introduces complex modularity. You have membrane-bound organelles acting as containerized applications.
Like little isolated apps running on a phone.
Precisely. You have the nucleus functioning as a highly secure, encrypted server for the core genetic data, and mitochondria dropped in as standardized external power supplies.
Wow.
It is a completely distinct OS rollout, requiring a massive leap in engineering overhead.
Okay, so sitting right on top of that operating system, we have the kingdom. And the CPT calls this the product architecture.
Right.
This is your major brand family division. In tech, it's the hard split between enterprise server solutions and consumer mobile devices.
That's a perfect analogy.
Biologically, Plantae is the architecture for autotrophic, stationary units that run on solar energy, while Animalia is the architecture for heterotrophic, mobile units that require combustible fuel, meaning other organisms, to generate kinetic energy.
And once that product architecture is established, you need a physical chassis to mount the hardware. That is the phylum. The phylum is the fundamental hardware platform.
The structural template.
Exactly.
Like Arthropoda is an exoskeleton chassis built around hemolymph hydraulics, whereas Chordata is an endoskeleton chassis built around a centralized dorsal neural cable.
Yes, and this is crucial. You can't just incrementally tweak an arthropod until it becomes a chordate.
Right. The foundational physics of how the hardware handles gravity and oxygen diffusion are just entirely incompatible.
Which is why the CPT model argues that macro-evolution between phyla is functionally impossible.
Yeah.
You cannot slowly mutate a MacBook into an iPhone. They are built on different motherboards. However, once you have that phylum hardware platform established, you move down to the class level, which the CPT defines as the design series or generation.
Okay, so this would be like taking the baseline Chordata hardware and rolling out targeted generational upgrades.
Exactly.
Like Mammalia is a massive iterative upgrade. It introduces thermal regulation endothermy and a completely novel internal gestation mechanism. And then Aves, the birds, take that same Chordata base and optimize the skeletal matrix for extreme weight reduction and aerodynamic lift.
It is a brilliant hierarchical system of engineering taxonomy. But having a corporate hierarchy is one thing. A company needs employees to actually build and launch these products.
Right.
Mapping this out theoretically raises an immediate logistical hurdle. A master architect or a corporate CEO does not sit on the factory floor assembling every individual unit.
So who is actually writing the code? How does this overarching leader get these designs into the world?
Well, the source material introduces this concept of intermediary actors, which it calls scientific artisans.
Scientific artisans. I like that.
The idea is that the overarching leader sets the macroeconomic vision, the design portfolio, but delegates the actual systemic execution to cascading tiers of specialized engineering teams.
Okay, so you would have top-level artisans functioning as like cellular and molecular engineers.
Right.
And their sole focus is writing the foundational OS code and designing the molecular machines, like ATP synthase.
Exactly. And then mid-level artisans would act as developmental geneticists. They take those molecular tools and draft the phylum-level hardware chassis.
And if we look at the geological strata, specifically the fossil record, through the lens of these artisan teams, it completely reframes one of the most contentious periods in Earth's history.
The Cambrian explosion.
Yes, the sudden simultaneous appearance of nearly all major animal phyla around 540 million years ago.
Which, for a theory relying on slow, gradual, unguided mutation, is a complete nightmare.
Absolutely. The Burgess Shale shows us that you go from very simple, soft-bodied organisms to highly armored, complex creatures with articulated limbs and compound eyes in just a geological blink of an eye.
And the intermediate fossils simply aren't there.
Right. They just aren't there. But if we apply the CPT model, this lack of transition isn't a missing puzzle piece. It's the expected footprint of an official release log, a coordinated software launch.
A massive, synchronized design sprint. Under the CPT framework, the billions of years prior, the Precambrian era, served as the vital beta testing epoch.
Okay, beta testing.
Yes. The top-level artisans were rigorously stress-testing the eukaryotic operating system. You see experimental deployments like the Ediacaran biota, which were essentially failed prototypes.
Oh, those bizarre quilted organisms that couldn't survive predation or environmental shifts.
Exactly. So the artisans wiped the servers, they deprecated the Ediacaran code, finalized the core genetic API, specifically things like the Hox gene clusters that control spatial body mapping. Yeah. And then, once the infrastructure was stable, the leader authorized the full Cambrian launch. Dozens of distinct phyla templates deployed simultaneously across the globe.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because it relates perfectly to cross-pollination in corporate tech. It's exactly like Apple putting the exact same camera module in both an iPad and an iPhone.
Yeah.
It's not that the iPad evolved from the iPhone, it's that the design teams share components. Those Hox genes act as master control switches. A mid-level artisan doesn't have to redesign an optical sensor or a joint articulation from scratch for every new phylum.
No, they just call the standardized Hox gene module, insert it into the new template, and tweak the localized parameters.
Okay, I follow the logic of the initial launch. It explains the subtleness of the fossil record and the deep genetic similarities across disparate body plans. But any tech consumer knows that when a company relentlessly launches new hardware, eventually, old platforms become obsolete.
The market gets crowded.
Exactly. The ecosystem gets crowded, legacy systems drag down overall performance. So how does this biological corporation manage its bloated portfolio once the units are actually on the market?
That brings us to the lower ranks of taxonomy: order, family, genus, and ultimately species. In the CPT model, the species level represents the final deployed product.
The stock keeping unit, or a SKU?
Yes, the SKU. And this is where the framework integrates seamlessly with what traditional biology calls micro-evolution.
Because we do see evolution happen in real time.
We do.
We see bacteria develop antibiotic resistance. We see finches' beaks change shape over a few seasons depending on the seed availability. The CPT isn't denying that.
Not at all. It actively relies on it. But it reframes microevolution not as the boundless engine of all biological diversity, but as localized patch update.
Patch updates.
Right. The lower-level artisans acting as ecological fine-tuners are constantly pushing minor iterative adjustments to the deployed SKUs. This ensures they remain viable within their specific, shifting environmental niches.
Oh, so like pushing a software patch to increase a predator's camouflage or updating a plant's thermal tolerance. It's ongoing maintenance to maximize the lifespan of the product line.
Exactly. But, as you pointed out, localized patches can only do so much. Eventually, the underlying hardware architecture becomes obsolete.
Right.
The global environment changes fundamentally, or the overarching leader is ready to roll out a radically advanced product architecture that simply cannot run alongside the legacy systems.
Which brings us to the darker side of a product roadmap.
Yes, it does.
Mass extinctions. Under the CP2 model, a mass extinction isn't an unlucky asteroid strike or a random string of volcanic winters. It is deliberate, system-wide portfolio pruning.
The overarching leader conducts a macro-level portfolio review. If an entire suite of product lines is monopolizing resources, locking up the global carbon and biomass, and preventing the deployment of the next major iteration, those legacy lines are systematically discontinued.
I have to stop here and ask a pointed question.
Go for it.
Isn't a global mass extinction a rather brutal way to discontinue a city? I mean, we are talking about events like the Permian-Triassic extinction, where roughly 90% of all Earth's species were eradicated.
It's true.
Or the KT boundary that wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs, framing the fiery, suffocating death of trillions of organisms as a mere portfolio pruning feels incredibly sterile. Good software engineers try to avoid bricking the entire system during an update.
It is a very valid point,
Yeah.
and it introduces a stark utilitarianism to the framework.
Yeah.
However, objectively, we have to look at the physical constraints of the biological medium.
Okay.
Unlike digital software, biological SKUs are physically instantiated. They consume finite metabolic resources. They occupy literal physical space.
So Earth's carrying capacity is essentially the server limit.
Exactly. You have a thermodynamic limit. The dinosaurs were a highly successful, globally entrenched apex product line. They monopolized nearly every available macroecological niche.
Right.
Now, if the overarching vision of the design portfolio required the eventual rollout of highly intelligent, socially complex, massive-brained mammals, which was a requirement for the eventual Homo sapiens SKU, that architecture requires an enormous amount of metabolic energy and stable ecological space to develop.
And a tiny shrew-like mammal is never going to outcompete a T-Rex for those resources.
Yeah,
The
but
legacy system is too dominant.
precisely. You cannot incrementally hot swap an entrenched apex predator for an entirely new hardware platform.
Yeah.
The interdependence of the food web is just too rigid.
Wow.
Therefore, to execute a hard pivot in the global product architecture, the legacy systems must be forcefully deprecated. The slate must be wiped clean to clear what the sources call ecological shelf space.
So the asteroid wasn't an accident. It was a targeted deprecation protocol. By clearing the board, the artisans instantly freed up the global biomass, and that allowed the mammals, which were essentially a localized background expansion pack, to suddenly scale up, radiate across the globe, and become the dominant enterprise solution.
It is undoubtedly harsh at the level of the individual unit, but from a high-level portfolio management perspective, it's a highly efficient way to break ecological gridlock and force radical innovation and long-term ecosystem viability. It ensures the ecosystem progresses according to the master roadmap, rather than stagnating.
That fundamentally changes how you perceive the timeline of our planet. The idea that mass extinctions are not setbacks, but necessary, orchestrated system reboots.
It really does.
I want you to really think about how this framework alters your daily perception of nature. The next time you look at a complex ecosystem, a coral reef, a dense forest, or even just your dog, or the anatomical structure of your own hand, consider the possibility that you are not looking at the surviving remnants of a chaotic, unguided lottery.
Right?
You are looking at highly iterated, meticulously version-controlled skews in a massive creative ecosystem.
It takes the exact same biological data we have today and completely flips the narrative. It replaces blind chance with deliberate, staged engineering. It acknowledges the undeniable reality of genetic similarity in taxonomic hierarchies, but removes the necessity of deep-time common descent.
Just completely replaces it with the strategic reuse of code by intelligent agents.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which serves as a fascinating reminder that data rarely speaks for itself. The underlying philosophical assumptions we bring to the table completely dictate the story that the scientific data tells us.
It absolutely does, and it leaves us with one incredibly provocative final thought.
What's that?
Well, if the history of life on Earth truly is a managed portfolio, if it is a sequential record of beta tests, explosive coordinated design sprints, and deliberate system-wide prunings to clear ecological shelf space, look at the state of our world right now.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Look at the immense strain on the current biological OS, the shifting climate, the saturation of the human scale. What kind of radical, fundamentally distinct next-gen upgrade do you think the overarching leader might be quietly preparing for the next geological epoch?